Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
So, good evening and welcome to the first in a series of shows which are called the Chalkboard Chronicles. I've been thinking about this project for a while. I'm looking forward to hearing from our listeners, and really delighted today to have a fantastic guest who we're going to hear from again a little later on. So first, a little bit of context. I think the show takes a bit of a setup. So I'm fascinated by stories and storytelling. My name is Ben White. I'm an assistant head teacher. I teach psychology and sociology. I've got a background in education, research, and some writing. Kind of dabbled in CPD and coaching. Before all that, I thought I was going to be a theologian or a minister, but that's another story. Now I'm part-time, so I work 4 days a week in a secondary school in Kent, and then I spend 1 day a week on projects that interest me and seem worth investing time in. So this year, that includes looking at how phones are used or not used in schools. So I feel strongly about what schools can do in terms of information and providing kind of safe space away from kind of smartphones and technology. Interested in stories, and then this is my newest project, is connecting with teachers via this podcast. So this will go out monthly on Wednesdays at 7:30. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Martin Griffin, who is a teacher, researcher, and writer, best known for books which include the Mindset series. So most recently, I believe, is the Vesper Handbook, which has won a couple of awards. And then maybe less known in the education circles, that Martin also is a novelist and has written a couple of novels, including The Second Stranger and The Last Visitor. So welcome aboard, Martin. It's fantastic to have you here.
Hi, Ben. How are you? You okay?
I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, and you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Pleasure to be with you tonight.
So I'm really pleased to have you on board. And before I go further, I'm just going to provide a brief thank you from our sponsors who've made the show possible. So today's show is sponsored, of course, by John Catt, educational publishers who provide professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So you can boost your professional development today if you visit thejohncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles they have. And for a discount, use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. We're also supported by USA Study. Your students could study in the USA. USA Study is a one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. It provides up-to-date resources about universities, their programs, scholarships, application requirements, all in one place. So get easy to access tools, personalised timetables, expert tips, application templates, and webinars with admissions officers to help your students really stand out when they're making those applications. And you can find all of that at usastudy.co.uk. And while I'm doing this section, fantastic opportunity to mention Teachers Talk Connect, which I'm sure you've heard about if you listen to regular shows. So the Teacher Talk radio team are going to be in Manchester on Saturday, the 1st of March, 2025 for Teachers Talk Connect, which is our biggest free event so far. You can hear from main stage speakers including Lee Parkinson, who's also known as Mr. P, Kate Jones, Vic Goddard, and you can attend subject-specific sessions across a range of subjects and phases. And there's obviously a great chance to network and meet with teachers, partly what this show is about, providing a chance and a space to speak with other teachers. Find out more about that at ttradio.org. Or, of course, if any of you are attending the BET show, you can visit our stand there as well. Okay. So once again, this is show 1 of the Chalkboard Chronicles. I'm delighted to welcome Martin aboard. And I was going to briefly just kick off today's show, so a slight diversion from our what will become our regular format, with a little bit of context. So why start a radio show about stories? So I thought I should probably try and explain that. So often during teaching, it can feel like we're building the plane whilst we're flying it. Some of you who taught during the pandemic. Maybe that was most pronounced there. And that's partly what we'll be doing with this show. So today, our guest is both going to share with us fantastic insights about his experience teaching, leading and working with schools, but also his expertise in stories and how they shape our lives. I'm hoping will inform the show as we go. I became fascinated by stories when I worked on a project with Professor Becky Allen and Matt Evans, The Next Big Thing in Education, where we really explored how complex schools are. And any of us who work in schools will know they're complex, quite messy places. And there came a point where we realised the school itself, when you think of it as a single entity, almost doesn't exist. You've got multiple versions of your school that exist in the minds of whoever's in there, the students, the teachers, other staff. Everyone's trying to make sense of a school. And even those individuals who are making sense of a school, their stories, maybe even the story I tell myself about my school or you tell about yours, changes within a day, sometimes even quicker. Martin, what am I talking about?
Well, listen, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think partly we create culture through storytelling, don't we? So what I think you're trying to get at, Ben, is the fact that we carry around in our heads a kind of version of the world informed by some sort of structural principles. We're immediately trying to make sense of what's happened to us by organizing it in a narrative way. And narratives work because they have clear beginnings, middles, and ends, and one event leads to another. I think part of leading in a kind of culture or contextual change, if you're trying to make things and build things, is to tell stories continually about the reasons why we're doing this, what we're building, where we're going with it. Stories. Schools are storytelling machines, aren't they? I think it's a really important element of what we do. Just sit in a staff room for 15 minutes and listen, and you're going to hear tales told, aren't you, from teacher to teacher, from staff member to staff member.
Yes.
And you know what, Ben? Just one final thing. They're not always contemporary stories. What's really interesting when you visit schools, colleges, are the stories they tell that have become part of the culture, that have become ingrained. They tell you something interesting about the culture of a place too.
Have you got an example of one of those? Because I find that idea intriguing. So a story that has become part of the background of a school.
Yeah. So I've worked in a number of schools across my career with hundreds of different members of staff. And sometimes you can arrive at a place and realize these are the stories we tell ourselves. We might tell ourselves stories about context. You will have worked in a place that tells the story about our unique and special context, makes us victims of this curious geographical quirk. And as a result, our jobs here are uniquely hard. Does that ring a bell? Have you heard that one before?
I have heard that one before. So what I thought we'd do, our show is going to break into two parts today. So we've got a little bit of setting up the whole series. So why we're both fascinated by stories and kind of the different shape they take in schools. And then what's going to be the primary kind of section of all of the shows that I run in this series, which is where I have a set of questions to ask our guest about the stories that they have heard, have told of experience and can share with us. So first of all, I thought I'd just kind of set up one aspect of storytelling. So you mentioned it, this idea they have a structure. One of my favourite writers about stories is Jonathan Gottschall, who wrote a book called The Storytelling Animal. And he says a story just needs a character, some sort of predicament or challenge, and then an attempt to get out of it. That's the story. So you've got your person, they're faced with some sort of difficulty. We learn about that person through how they deal with it. And this is how it goes. Some of this can be implied in really short stories. So I'm thinking stories that are told about schools. So that could include a one-liner. This is a good school. This is an inadequate school. They're somewhat simplistic or misleading. So even our friends at Ofsted are coming around to the idea that that's quite a blunt story. But what about the story? There's others that we tell in our own schools, that this is a kind school. this school changes lives, this school seeks excellence in all, they all convey something. But I think they tell us a lot about the person telling it as much as the kind of hero of that tale as well. Martin, can you help me out again? What am I going on about?
I think you've hit upon something here, particularly with your exploration of stories needing a protagonist and a problem or conflict. And a lot of school stories are told around a kind of abstract nemesis, and it's often socio-political circumstances, isn't it? So often schools will say, we're a good school, but we're facing this issue. Or we used to be a good school until we faced this issue. Or historically, we were X school until this happened. Or post this event, you hear this a lot, don't you, with post-pandemic or post-COVID, as a consequence of this event, we're now facing this challenge. I think a lot of stories require that abstract nemesis, don't they? The antagonist to our protagonist. So I think you've got something there, Ben, for sure.
And there seems to be something about where you are in that story as well. So it's okay to have a challenging nemesis in the story that defines your career or role or school, provided it's not, and it defeated us.
Exactly.
which is a bit of a thing. And the same, I think, is true with all the individuals in our school. So we're obviously, we won't explore all of this in our single episode today, but you've got the stories told about the school. Then you have the autobiographical stories in a school that everyone's telling themselves all day. So we're kind of creatures who kind of see things in narratives or remember narrative shapes. Yeah. And I feel like students and staff, so our teachers and others, we tell ourselves stories and they can be motivating or not. So I've been collecting these. I came across a couple few over the last 3 or 4 years. So there's one year 10 student, she's a lot older now. She's agreed for me to share the story. I was asked to help mentor her. And I said, "How are you today?" And she said, "Terrible." "Why?" She said, and I apologized for her language. She said, I'm a bitch." So, "Oh, what do you mean?" She said, "That's just how I am. So are all the others." She meant everyone else in school. She said, "I can't cope in school anymore. Can't wait to leave." So that was her story, which the nemesis had overwhelmed her. A couple of years later, I was mentoring a year 11 student. It was about, maybe a bit later this time, maybe April or May. And I said, it must have been, anyway, it doesn't matter when, but it's before then, because obviously the exams kick in May. But I said, "What are you looking forward to?" And I can still see her looking very, what's the word? She's like embarrassed. She looked over her shoulder. She leaned in and whispered and said, "Sir, I'm looking forward to maths." And then she sort of looked shocked herself. I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Well, my teacher has said my grade is not going to fall from the sky." She kind of quoted this line the teacher gave her. And she knows I can do it, but I need to work at it. The brilliant thing about that is it's the same student as the one before.
Yeah.
So I wonder what you make of that.
That's fabulous, isn't it? That's a great example of the power of the stories we begin to tell ourselves, but also, isn't it illustrative of how important teachers are as meaning makers? We tell stories to students and they believe us. Okay, let's just take a moment with this. That the maths teacher in question has clearly told a story with this lovely, by the way, with this lovely, vivid visual imagery, important part of storytelling. This grade is not going to fall from the sky, has kind of planted this lovely image in the mind of the student in question, who's now thinking, I'm going to catch that grade when it comes. I need to work to make sure I'm in the right position. There's a lot of interesting imagery and metaphorical intent in that maths teacher's tale. But crucially, Ben, the student believes it. And they begin to tell themselves that story. Here's one that I've done before. I was with a group of students. I'd been given a group in year 11. Now, inheriting a class in year 11 can be hard, okay? They're meant to in an ideal world, they're going to have the same teacher for 2 years throughout the key stage. It's crucial. And of course, various disasters overcome the situation, staffing complexities. I'm picking up at year 11, a very demotivated year 11.
While you're there, that can lead to a really self-defeating story for that class, can't it? There's
Absolutely.
a real danger there, I think, that of not being supported enough or being let down by teachers or whatever. It's a big moment. Sorry to interrupt. Do carry on.
No, you're exactly right, Ben, because I walked into a classroom full of students who had a story. They were ready to tell this story, a story of betrayal and abandonment. I handed out new exercise books. This class were the bottom set, and I made them write English, Mr. Griffin, top set. And they looked around furtively, some of them smirking. "Sir, really?" I said, "Yeah, you're going to write top set on your book." And it was just the start of a storytelling process in which we were going to try and reframe everything that had happened to them and turn it into a pivotal moment. And while I'm talking, Ben, very briefly, that's another characteristic of stories, isn't it? That we split them into acts, and each act is some sort of inflection or pivot in which there is a change in direction or a moment of realization, an epiphany or an action which changes the course or direction of the story. And I think that's important too. We did this, and as a result, this happened. Schools tell those stories a lot, don't they?
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalized timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
Do you think there's something about the shape of the school year that lends itself to that as well?
What, 3 acts?
Yeah,
3
I think there's something about that. I remember my assistant, when I was at ECT, my mentor said, "Thing is, Ben, you're going to make loads of mistakes and there's going to be crises. And then there's going to be a holiday. You're going to come back. You're going to start again." And I don't think he's completely wrong about that. I quite like that. You start again, you go again. You're ready to start the next act, the next part.
Absolutely. And do you know what? You can pluck that story out of your mind very quickly and say, X person once told me this. And here's a similar one that's kind of has some sort of concord with yours. A head teacher saying to me, "Teaching is white-collar coal mining." All right. And I thought that was such a vivid and interesting metaphor. It's a story in itself almost about the levels of persistence, strength, resilience that are needed to get through. But again, it was this idea of retreat, regroup, and go again, which was an important story that the school told its staff. It was really powerful, that.
And quite concise, isn't it? Those 3 parts are really clear. So we've heard a little bit about the stories that are told in schools about schools. And I think they're powerful and important, contribute to culture. And whilst you've got all these different people in a school telling multiple different tales, there's a lot of overlap there. The things they share become the culture of the school. Then we've got the individuals in the school, students telling stories about their day. And often that's at odds with what we think is really going on. Then we've got, as teachers, the stories that are told about us, which can be quite disempowering. So don't want to become too kind of Ofsted focused, but I came across one school leader a few years ago who had a second successive negative Ofsted judgment at a time in which non-selective schools in selective areas like Kent found it almost impossible to not be unsatisfactory because it was very much progress and grade based. And this is the second, in her mind, failed Ofsted inspection. And I said, "What's it like being a leader in your school?" And she said, doing your best every day and never being good enough. And that's sad. And I think that happens in our schools sometimes. We get people stuck in a rut where they feel whatever they do, it's not enough. And I think that story is maybe tangential to another, which is where people think they're not doing enough and they're kind of waiting to be found out. Do you still come across those stories in the schools you visit and work with?
Absolutely. In fact, a story that I hear sometimes, and it's always it's a dispiriting one, is the kind of Sisyphean tale. All right. Every day I exert huge amounts of effort, and it's utterly futile. By the end of the day, the rock is back at the bottom of the hill. And you will hear from staff, understandably caught in tricky situations, that teaching, that a life of work is about kind of, I don't know, trading your personal freedom in exchange for money. You tolerate periods of extremely hard work, shackled to all these fruitless tasks that are going to make no difference at all. But luckily, you get a few high days and holidays at the end. There's an element of that defeatist sense of circularity, isn't there, in some storytelling?
And I think there's an element of life being sometimes tough and hidden. So for a while, I was really obsessed with Walden by David Henry Thoreau. He said that most men live lives of quiet desperation. But yeah, sometimes teaching feels like that. And then he threw another line in, like the next line in that extract is he said, "It's there for others who have succumbed to resignation, which is just confirmed desperation." when you're, and I feel like it's either literal resignation or you do meet people that seem to be resigned to, it's just not going anywhere. And that's hard, isn't it? That's tough. I think schools can be places that can foster that sort of story. I think the question is what we do about it, isn't it, as well? So again, this kind of story collecting that I've been doing, another senior leader had faced a bad or unsatisfactory Ofsted inspection in both meanings of the word. She decided differently. She said, yeah, we've thought about it as a school. We've decided to forget Ofsted. I have changed her language. She said F's Ofsted, but I think it wasn't forget, but I don't know when the watershed is. And so we know what we're about as a school. We're going to work to be the best they can. Ofsted can take it or leave it. And then for me, this school leader was in the optimum place to be in an epic story. Like, we're going for it. Yeah. And they're the same person. Again, it's the same person.
Oh, how interesting.
Which is just, and it's in the same school with the same kids and the same staff. And I don't want to oversimplify it. There's a lot going on, but it is interesting. A lot of our job is mental, and a lot of mental work is all about framing, I think. I don't know whether you agree or whether you want to push back or follow
Absolutely,
up on that.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. It's the process of psychologically framing a set of circumstances, for sure, internally or externally justifying success or failure. And there's a trick there, isn't there? Studies of high-performing athletes will show they will internally justify success. I succeeded because I've trained harder than the other guy, or I succeeded because on the day I was better, but they externally justify failure. The court was difficult, or the conditions were poor, or the referee's judgments or decisions went against us ultimately. In fact, as I speak, I'm just seeing some very clear parallels here between football managers or sports people very quickly reframing triumph or disaster immediately after it in the post-match interview. There's an element of that in teaching as well. Here's what happened this year. It's almost we're going to account for precisely what happened over the course of 3 terms, reframe it, reconstruct it, create a protagonist, a conflict, a villain, and an outcome, and move on from there.
I'm thinking it's the mid-table clubs. They're the ones that want to capture their... Because obviously you've got the elite, and, you know, there are schools that are elite, and whether that's intake or something that means they're outliers, they can tell a story about winning. But I think everyone else in that league, they have to do that reframing to stay in it, don't they? Each year, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, and one of the I know a lot about narrative structure. I've read a lot about it in preparation for writing novels. You've got to understand where you're headed with the story. You don't just follow your nose. And one of the constructs or helpful pieces of advice I've come across is the idea of the try-fail cycle. Are you familiar with this, Ben?
I've not come across that. Now, if you tell me a bit more, that sounds intriguing.
Okay, well, the opening act of a story is often quite easy to put together. An aspiring novelist or screenwriter knows, okay, I've got this character in this world, and then this inciting incident is going to draw them into this special adventure. And then they often know Act 3. There's going to be a third act boss battle in a wormhole where they defeat this incredibly exciting monster. Act 2, who was it? Might have been Philip Larkin who said a story has a beginning, a muddle, and an end. Act 2 is the challenge. How do I take them from this exciting opening to this ultimate kind of conflict? And you do it through a series of try-fail cycles. That is, circumstances change and the protagonist attempts various different ways to solve a complex and ever-evolving problem.
So I think we might be onto something, because the muddle. I'll tell you why. So it took me about 10 years to notice this, but I would get my new Year 12 class in September, and it was great. I was excited. Then they're all great. If any are listening, they're all brilliant and always will be. And I'd go into staff and say, this class, I mean, they're better than I've ever had a Year 12 class. Like, they're keen, they're coming in, they know their stuff, like, they're getting into this routine. And that lasts a few weeks, sometimes longer.
Yeah.
And then the muddle comes. And the muddle comes because those students have all got different background knowledge, different motivations, different life situations, different mental or physical health issues. And it all starts to go in different directions. And by about, say now, just hypothetically, things have spread quite a bit. And you hear the first glimmers of, I'm not sure. I'm not sure they're going to do as well. And you've got that model. But that try-fail cycle, on a good day, you go, yes, it's tough. Tomorrow, what do? We start again. We're going to do this. And I think that short story is quite helpful. Okay, so that's true. It didn't work as well. It never does. What's next? Okay, we're going to start tomorrow, and I'm going to focus on this, like working with those students or framing things differently. Yeah. And I don't know whether a predictor of how that's going to go is whether I keep on that cycle, that try-fail cycle, or just go back to my confirmed resignation.
No, I strongly recommend the former. All right, but what we're going to do for students as well is tell short stories involving try-fail cycles in the middle of courses, aren't we? We're not going to say, right, your ultimate aim is a grade that's going to happen in 2 years' time. It's a long old slog, bear with me. Instead, we're going to be creating artificial mini conclusions throughout, aren't we? So students feel like they're moving through 3 acts and completing. Here, we've hit the end of the topic. Let's celebrate. We're all still alive.
So you say that.
That's the kind of storytelling we need, isn't it?
You say that, and when you're saying it, it sounds important to me. And when I hear it, I'm kind of reflecting on when I get that wrong, because I'm all about the long goal. So I spend maybe too much time talking about, don't forget, in 2 years, this is going to happen. You're going to be great at it because... And maybe as an adult, I've got a longer time frame for my storytelling, because I'm already on this loop. Every year has a story, and I see similarities. And I don't think I do enough as a teacher. That shorter story today, this week we're doing this. Here's the challenge. We've all succeeded. And then here we are. Someone who does it really well, actually, I think he's going to be a guest in a future show, is a friend of mine called Dan Borman, who's a chemistry teacher. He talks about in your lessons, and it's 101, but it's still something I forget, like getting all the students through that, not just a few. Like, we're doing this, we're trying, we've succeeded. Do that a few times, and suddenly they start believing what you tell them even more.
Yeah. I think that's really important. What's next, Ben? Come on.
That's it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so anyway, we've. What I've done there is I've spoken for about 30 seconds. It was really good stuff, muted. So if you can just imagine, it was top drawer, and I'll go again. So we've talked about stories that are told about schools in the schools. All the different storytelling creatures milling around in schools, the teachers, students, and what they're doing. And there's a lot that we can explore in future there. Then we've got stories told about us that includes kind of Ofsted and elsewhere. And sometimes we're sold a bit of a pup when we're the bit part players in someone else's story, even when it's a positive one. So for someone 2 steps removed from a school chalk face, the solution to whatever their problem is that leaves them feeling like a hero can be quite simple, like closing the gap or differentiating effectively or transforming lesson observations. And sometimes that little bit, that happily ever after, isn't really worked out at all. It's why in lots of films and books, when it ends, you don't go into that sort of detail. And I feel sometimes that's a problem for us as teachers. We're just given this thing like AI, there's lots of great stuff there, but if you're left with the expectation that it's going to somehow just transform things by itself, that can be quite stressful. Is that coherent, Martin, or is that less so?
That's less so. Let's explore that a little bit further. So are you, tell me more about AI. Let's expand on that example and then I'll dive in.
So if I work at a high level looking at schools and I'm aware about large language models and their capacity to do administrative tasks and create content, then I might say, oh, brilliant. I've got all these teachers complaining about workload. I've got financial pressures and I've got students not doing well as they need to. And I've got this potentially transformative tech. Here you go, crack on with that. And that becomes and happily ever after. We introduced it. It was transformative.
Absolutely. And, that reminds me of something that I think is important, the gap between idea and execution. And often we think the idea in itself is sufficient. I'll give you an example. As a writer of fiction, you often schlep around after your books come out, talking in little bookshops to gatherings of readers, or you're at some sort of crime festival somewhere and there's with a panel of other writers and there's 30 people in the room, and you have a little talk about your book and you try and pitch it and sell it, and there's a signing later on and you're hoping a few people will buy it. But there's often questions at the end, and almost all of them focusing on the idea of story of a novel. Where did that idea come from? As soon as you got that idea, you must have thought you were made up. Or people will say, "I've got a great idea for a novel." I don't think ideas are as valuable as we think they are, because there's a huge gap between the idea and the execution, isn't there? And often we think the idea itself is the end of the story, when in fact it's the inciting incident. So, for example, it seems culturally acceptable and appropriate for someone to say, "Oh, I've got a great idea for a novel." We don't see that as ridiculous. It's almost as if, okay, well, that's going to be writable. Sort it out, go and do it. You wouldn't say, "I've got a great idea for a painting," would you? Okay, that sounds utterly ridiculous. Painting doesn't require an idea. Go and do it.
So here I think there's something about the way we frame talking about what we do with schools, maybe more middle and senior leaders. If we just stay talking at that ideas level, it's simpler, isn't it? But it's not, and it can be quite cathartic, but it might not get things done. So there's a lot there. So we are actually at the midpoint of episode 1. So thanks for listening along so far. The format each week will be a little intro, reference to things that may have happened recently. Won't be as long as our first half. It's kind of setting the scene today and our interest in stories. And then the idea is to meet a range of fascinating, ordinary people from across the educational landscape, schools, teachers, school leaders, and others, and ask them similar questions, find out their story, where they've come from, what they're doing, little vignettes that kind of help them along the way. This is the plan. So in a couple of moments' time, we're going to kick off with our first run through of these questions. If any resonate and you feel you want to answer them, feel free to share that via Teacher Talk Radio on social media streams, or my own streams on Blue Sky or on X or Twitter. Before we launch into those questions, we have a little message from the sponsors who've brought the show and made it possible tonight. So we have First of all, a reminder that John Catt is a partner with Teachers Talk Radio. They publish CPD books and resources that support great teaching and learning across a range of topics from schools, writers around the world, and they're read by teachers and school leaders and others all over the world. You can boost your CPD today by visiting johncattbookshop.com. And if you use the code JCTTR2425, you get a 20% discount from your order. And we also have support from USA Study, where students who can study in the USA are given a one-stop platform to guide them through their college application. There's resources about universities, the programs, how the courses work, scholarships, application requirements, all there. And there's easy to access tools, timelines, and then some tips. And they also run a series of webinars about the admissions process. You can find out more at usastudy.co.uk. And a reminder that on the 1st of March, in the great city of Manchester, which you may have heard isn't a million miles away from our guest's home today, we have Teachers Talk Connect, which is our biggest free event ever. We've got a range of main stage speakers, including Mr. P or Lee Parkinson, Kate Jones, Vic Goddard, and you can attend subject-specific CPD, also FACE-specific, and there's some great chances to network as well. And so feel free to check out more about that on ttradio.org, where you can get your tickets lined up. Okay, so back to our main questions. This is Chalkboard Chronicles episode 1. We have Martin Griffin in the virtual studio, and he is our guinea pig and also sort of story consultant for our questions. So we do appreciate this. So let me go to question 1, which is it's a big one. How did you get here? What's your story, Martin?
I was thinking about this because Ben, by the way, just to peek behind the curtain here, Ben sent me this question earlier and said, I'm thinking of asking this. So I've had to think about it. I'm not going to tell my story in the usual way, Ben. I'm not going to say classroom teacher, head of subject, head of department, head of year, head of sixth form, assistant head, deputy head. Okay?
You did smuggle that in, though. Carry on.
But yes, that's the linear and crashingly uninteresting way of telling a teaching story. How about this? We focus in on some inflection points or act breaks instead. All right. Here's what happened to me. I changed when I hit 3 significant moments in my career. Significant moment number 1, I was held rigorously accountable for the outcomes of other teachers. Do you remember that moment? You're first head of department and it becomes clear to you everything has changed now. This is not about my performance in the classroom. I am in charge of everyone's outcomes. That was an act break moment. That was moving from the person I was to the person I became. Here's the second. I was held rigorously accountable for the culture, behaviour and progress of over 400 students in a sixth form, 370 of which I didn't teach. And I had to kind of sculpt this culture through a series of assemblies, lectures, meetings with parents. That was a moment as well. I changed when that became part of my teaching story. And then a final one, and I think you'll like this. There is a moment in your teaching career where you are duty bound to tell a story you don't fully believe. That comes to us all at some point as well. How about that as a summary?
That's good. This is good.
Of moving through phases of teaching.
So we're going to go reverse order. So we have to go back to the beginning, and we've got, so if I'm reading the story of your career, and there's this big moment when you're held accountable for those other teachers' results, what do we learn about your character from how you deal with that?
Well, here's what you learn, that I was hopeless at it to begin with. And in fact, what I'm introducing here are some stormy seas. Every story needs one, don't they? Waves of professional adversity. We're into try-fail cycles here, Ben, surely.
It's back, isn't it? It's interesting.
It's back. The good times, hard times element of stories. those transitions were extremely painful for me and professionally challenging. And I wonder whether they were for other people too. I'm not entirely sure. Let me tell you a very brief story, which is illustrative of how hard that first shift was. I was not the only person to become a head of department at the age of whatever I was, 30, 29, I can't remember, late 20s perhaps. Some of my colleagues and peers were beginning to as well. And I remember once being with a friend who would also become a head of English. And we were banging around at the weekend, and he had a laptop, and we were working in a cafe whilst also kind of planning to go to the cinema or whatever. And I said, Jim, what are you doing? And he said, I'm putting a PowerPoint together for a departmental meeting. That was a moment for me. A departmental meeting requires a PowerPoint. I had never seen a departmental meeting with a PowerPoint in it. What's a PowerPoint for in a meeting? Don't you come in with a single sheet of paper, moan about the kids, and tick off the 3 things you wanted to say? That was utterly transformative to me. Part of a really good story, I think, is this moment of epiphany or realization. The world is a new place. I've been seeing things incorrectly. I've become different as a result.
So we're learning a lot more from you, about you from these stories. I think we're learning about character, and we're also learning about the nature of schools, where you've been running department meetings just like your friend and colleague for presumably a while, and you may have even mentioned you were running them, but you, until that moment, hadn't realised that what the word you had and shared meant something almost entirely different.
Yeah,
which is, that's schools all over, isn't it?
Absolutely, isn't it? And this realization that they served an almost completely different function to the one that I thought they did. And of course, when you've been given no training or support in the delivery of departmental meetings, what you do to begin with is mimic those that you've seen before, as if they're little genre pieces. Oh, I know the rules of these. I know how to make one of these work.
And sometimes, at least in my experience, we do this without thinking about why. So I still remember, and it's almost like a movie in my head. It's Parents' Evening. It's 2008. It's my first one as a teacher, and it's in the school hall, and everyone's in a grid, and I'm sat in the middle, so I'm surrounded by 8 other teachers who are just in earshot if I lean and ask them. And I thought, I don't know what I'm doing in this Parents' Evening. So I asked them all, worked my way around, clockwise if you want. And each of them was like, I don't know. No one's asked. No one had asked them before. And anyway, got to get cracking. And none of them, anyway, it's just, this is how schools work, isn't it? So, but we're deviating from your story. So there was a really good cliffhanger you finished your little life story on, which was you had to tell a story that you didn't believe in. Tell us more about that, because that does happen in schools, and I know that resonates with me. I don't do that well at all.
Yeah. So this is the story that occurs. This is an Act 3 story, okay? You've the try-fail cycles, the setbacks and disasters of middle leadership have eventually led to some sort of crisis or success, which means senior leadership seems the next logical step. And for the first time in your career, you get to walk into the boardroom, or whichever, behind those hallowed doors, you peek behind the curtain, you see how the head teacher and their senior team operates. And very quickly you realize you might have been telling stories about them from the outside, and you might have lived with those stories for some time, okay? As an ambitious young teacher, I could do that better. They're not leading with integrity. There's no clarity about this. Their standards aren't high enough. Why aren't we doing A, B, or C? You've been telling yourself those stories as a younger teacher. Then you're in the room, and you suddenly realize that you're responding to changes of government. You're responding to a series of external challenges, antagonists that you had no idea existed. And suddenly you have to, I'll pluck something out of the air, do staff appraisal in a different way. And the leadership team discuss it, and a story is agreed upon. this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. It's best for staff development. These are all the positives. Right, everybody, we're telling this story when we leave this room because there are going to be no cracks. There are no weak points. We're all together on this. This is the direction of the organization for these reasons. Now, you often, for the first time in your career, you leave the room ready to tell a story that you're not entirely convinced you believe. And that is a difficult moment, but a necessary moment, I think, as part of leadership as well.
Do you think skin gets thicker over time? Because in that transition point, I know I've been doing this for 3 or 4 years now, the boardroom part. When you're just switching, very fresh in my mind is knowing how this story will land with the classroom version of me or the staff room version.
Yeah.
Who's going to say, what about this? What about that? Why haven't I thought about this? And both of those are kind of running in my head. It's tough, isn't it? Like knowing how to navigate that.
It is, because you're living in both. You're wearing both pairs of shoes, aren't you? At that point, what an ugly metaphor. Apologies,
yeah.
But as you progress, your skin thickens for sure.
And also, there's something about what people in a school need. So
yeah,
and this is not meant to be a patronising observation, but to be in an organisation, you want there to be a clear story and know what it's about. So I think both of us are thinkers, so kind of prone to introspection, breaking things down. That can be helpful, but sometimes if you share that broken down, complex, messy story, it's just not coherent, is it? What are we doing? This, and this. You just want to hear that. Okay, they've got a plan. I trust them. Like the student in the classroom. Like, I want to know where we're going. I don't want to know all the noise. It doesn't help.
I don't want the complexity. What's the signal?
Yeah.
I don't know how difficult that decision was. Tell us what we're doing.
Yes.
Certainty is important, isn't it? And the other thing I think that's worth pointing out is that your personal identification with a story that you might have told previous to that experience has to change. You have to change as an individual because you have more information than you did before.
Can you give an example of that? Because I feel like that seems important, but I don't quite understand.
Okay, well, I suppose what I'm saying is you might have new context. For example, a head teacher says, we've got this problem coming down the track because the local authority, XYZ, and suddenly you have an awareness of a socio-geographic challenge facing this part of the city, which means ABC about the 6 schools that operate within this in this 10-mile radius. And suddenly stories change then, don't they? This is not about me in my classroom. This is about something much bigger.
Yes, and that might change the way that we understand a smaller, important story, like the heating in the school or this wing or this building. Suddenly it gets thrown into a bigger. So there's a lot there. I think we could spend all the time on that question, but we're going to try to get through all these questions. We're going to get through. So our next question, taking this storytelling frame, is what are you scared of, or who are your nemesis?
Okay.
I want to hear this.
I'll do this. I'm going to give you 2 examples, and they're both vaguely recollected, but as honest and true as I can be with the memory I have. One is a teacher who said the equivalent of, listen, we can't put in what God left out, okay? Storytellers whose conception of teaching is there is a significant kind of biological component to brain structure. I'm not a fan of this neuroplasticity stuff. Some kids have got it and some kids haven't. That's a story I find frightening. I don't like that one at all.
It's hard, isn't it? I feel it's the end, isn't it? Because the story's done. That's it.
Yeah,
that's the bit.
Precisely. It's the end.
Yeah.
There's no further space for
that's
exploration, curiosity, embellishment, innovation.
That's the try-fail cycle. It's done, isn't it? There. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. We've come across that. So we've got one. That's really so I imagine if we dug deeper, that story is a subset of lots of others. and that they imply you can't do anything.
Yeah,
and that's their version
it's
of it.
Precisely.
Do you have another? She said there were two nemesis.
Yeah, the other one is often told by someone whose career has not been or is not as fulfilling and joyful as perhaps they hoped. And they don't, subconsciously, the story says, well, look, life is tough, work is hard, jobs are relentless. Why should students aspire to do A, B, or C? I don't like stories that suppress aspiration or innovation. So any story that says kids from round here don't do things like that, and they're expressed in lots of kind of nuanced and subtle ways, and it's often subtextual, but it's there.
The way you started
that.
Sorry to interrupt you. The way you started that kind of reminded me of that Thoreau quote that resignation is just confirmed desperation. You get the person telling that story has tried for a while. They feel like they're in a bit of a dead end, and then they're just perpetuating this. You can't. And that's hard.
Yeah.
And
it is hard.
Yeah.
I remember once trying to encourage a group of staff to think about increasing our expectation of student effort. Perhaps our students aren't working hard enough. Perhaps we should be giving them much more support and higher levels of expectation for what they achieve in their own study periods, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember a member of staff saying, look, why do they really need to work hard now, though? They've got a whole life of drudgery ahead of them. Can't we just leave them alone? I think that was illustrative of a person whose job was not giving them any hope, joy, purpose, and as a result was ensuring they suffocated the aspiration of others.
So that, I think, leads us to our next question. So we've heard what you're scared of or who your nemesis are, and we've got these two kind of strong stories. And I think I'm getting a real sense of what you think you're doing. So in your own autobiography, are you on a quest? You're on a journey? Are you waiting to find out? What is it you're doing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I hope. Well, I'm curious. Ben, we've for those of you who might not know, Ben and I have met before today, and we've had a few beers over the years and talked quite extensively about ideas. I am interested in ideas. What is school for? That is something that I think that's something I'm exploring. So rather than a quest or journey, that sounds very highfalutin, doesn't it? Perhaps I'm just exploring things I'm not yet fully cognizant of. I don't yet feel I've really got clarity on. So what is school for? I remember recently, by the way, being it was the summer. We were around somebody's house. There were 15 or 20 of us. There's white wine. It's someone's garden in the sunshine. There's a few teachers there, but the majority are not. And I remember a rather ebullient, kind of garrulous, challenging member of the group saying, "So what is school for, though? Seriously." Now, I kept quiet on this one. I thought I don't trust myself to actually persuasively and clearly explain my socio-political position here. But another teacher had a go. It was really interesting listening to him saying, well, it just keeps kids off the street. I thought, wow, we probably need something better than that. So are we here to champion expertise, insight, empathy? I think that's important. I think creating students who are innovative, who are going to be innovative, who take the initiative, I think that's important. I think we're here to ensure that our students have exciting work to do later in their lives, that they're solving interesting problems. I think there's a life chances element to education, which is hugely important to me. But there are other elements of the whole profession that confound me, that I'm still interested in. You must have some similar, Ben.
Yeah,
moments where you think, why do we do things this way?
So when I was working with with Becky and Matt, we kind of stumbled across this concept of a procedural regularity, a thing that's just happening without anyone really knowing why or what it's for. And then we dug into schools, and there's a bit of childcare. Keeping people off the streets is one of the things that schools do. Like during the pandemic, all parents with school-aged kids learned this is a valuable service that schools are carrying out. And then we have the slightly murky geopolitical part of it. So we're a bit worried about the working class being out and about in an uneducated, rabble-like way, maybe following the route of revolution that happened in France, and that drove us to get more people into schools. Then you've got the church's mission to get people in and educate them. All those things are going on. You've got now the closing the gap, the like helping people to access opportunities that we should all have. It's all there. So I feel like I'm getting two things from your story. So one is that you're on this kind of voyage of learning more about schools, and that gives you a drive just to keep thinking, to keep looking, to keep reframing things, which I think probably feeds into your capacity to fail and try again, which is vital. But I'm also hearing something else, which is your zeal to share that with others as well. So when you've talked about the nemesis being people whose stories are like this, which is a different thing than saying the person or the block themselves, and you seem quite driven by the idea that part of your mission, if that's not too kind of abstract or kind of pretentious a term, is to help people to reframe. Is that a reasonable observation, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I've been thinking two more examples that I hope clarify things. I'm really interested in the idea of whether we can teach hope.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalized timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
So I'm just going to fill. There's a few things we've heard so far. So I think I've thought a little more about the role of storytelling in schools, and in particular, that concept of the try-fail cycle. And I think sometimes I drift too far into kind of abstract, just ideas. And this is important, but it's what difference does it make? And I think that try-fail cycle being short for students is really important. And that's something I'm going to revisit when I'm back in school tomorrow. So with those students, what are we trying? How are we going to succeed? Then what do we do next? Like getting that cycle going again and again. And then we heard a few moments ago from Martin, who left a proper cliffhanger. I'm not quite sure when we switched links, so maybe the listeners missed this part. He said he's still trying to work out the extent to which it's possible to teach hope. And then we stopped there. So in a few seconds' time, Martin is going to rejoin us and we'll hear from him on whether it is indeed possible to teach hope. And I'm hoping we hear how you teach hope to students and how you teach hope to teachers as well. So I think he's on his way back in. And then while we wait, one more word from our sponsors, of course, who are John Catt Educational. And if you are intrigued by the prospect of looking through their vast catalogue of books and getting a 20% discount, then don't forget you can log in to their website and you can use the discount code, which I'm just going to read out once more, which is JCTTR2425. You get 20% off. Martin's back and he can tell us, hopefully, that it is possible to teach hope and how. Martin, over to you.
Ben, can you hear me? Am I here?
You are here and I can hear you.
Oh, terrific. Now, listen, this is going to be a crushingly disappointing moment.
Oh, no.
That's a question I'm still exploring, Ben. I don't know. Can you teach hope? I think we should be able to. I think that should be part of what we're trying to do. We want students excited to progress beyond the key stage through which we shepherd them, which means we too need to feel hopeful about life's possibilities, don't we?
It's there. If I'm hopeful, I've got an idea of heading somewhere. And your story sounds hopeful. You're aiming to find out more about schools and help those people you come across. And there's a little bit of hope is kind of an echo of having succeeded in the past. So when you told us your story about those 3 turning points, it's easy to look back and say, now, I learned this, I learned that, I learned this. And that's maybe a source of hope, is that you've got through those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the knowledge of that often helps you get through the next thing, doesn't it? Psychologists often refer to it as episodic future thinking, the ability to kind of time travel forward and see yourself on the other side of the problem. And experience gives you more and more vivid cognitive maps of what the future holds, what its possibilities and joys and excitement could be. I think it's the role of school to create vivid, compelling cognitive maps of the future. How about that?
This sounds good. Now, we have a couple of questions just to finish on. So we've talked about stories, and it's been intriguing to hear a bit more about what drives you and kind of what stands out when you're reflecting back on your own career. We often get told tall tales. And I wonder if you've been told a tall tale. Is that an Americanism, tall tale? Is that a thing we say in the UK? I just thought I'd check that. I've got US heritage, so sometimes it smuggles in. So what tall tales have you been told that you maybe once believed or even told other people just turn out to be just nonsense?
How about this one? All the good kids have gone to insert name of local school.
Of course, yeah. Okay.
I used to believe that one.
And what was the role of that story?
Shangri-La just down the road where everyone was super motivated and I just happened not to have a job there.
And if we had another show, we could almost explore what the story's doing there. So telling that story protects our sense of being a valuable institution because it's not our fault. It's just the good kids have taken their results elsewhere. But it's also like it's doing something for us, isn't it? Which is interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that's maybe one to come back to in the future. And then we've got, is there anything that sort of keeps you going? Are there little vignettes, moments, things people have told you, or stories that you've heard that when things are a bit tricky, like this keeps you coming back?
Yeah. How about the bricklayer story? Are you familiar with the Christopher Wren bricklayer story?
I'm going to say no, and hopefully we'll hear it.
It goes like this, and probably apocryphal. The architect Christopher Wren. This must be what 1670s, I guess, sometime around there. He comes across 3 people working on a building that is designed, one of whom seems depressed and sluggish, one of whom is purposeful but without any great enthusiasm, and one of whom is approaching their work with verve and vigor and engagement. And he asks the 3 bricklayers what they're doing, okay? And we have bricklayer number 1. He says, I'm just working to feed my family. I lay these bricks. I get paid. Figure number 2, this one stands up a little taller. He says, I'm building a great wall. And figure number 3, the man who seems charged with positivity and hope, there's that word again. He says, I'm an artist. I'm making a cathedral. 3 people doing the same job, but framing it in different ways. I thought that spoke to your theme this evening, Ben. So I thought I'd share that one with you.
I think that's a fantastic place to kind of sum things up. So thank you very much to Martin for giving up your time. First of all, to appear on this show, and then secondly, to be the guinea pig for a format that's never been tested before. It's much appreciated. And there's been a lot that has resonated with me, that concept of the try-fail cycle and your observation of stories having a beginning, a muddle, and an end, and that muddle being inevitable, I found quite cathartic, because that's the point we get to in lots of stories. This point in the year, it's the muddle bit. What do? You try again, and you're going to fail again. You try again, and you keep going till you run out of time. That's weirdly encouraging. And then that big concept of building a cathedral, that's what we're doing, isn't it? On a good day, when you look at school and what you're doing, you're constructing something that's going to be around long after us, the school and its culture and the people that pass through it. That's true as much as this class are tricky and things are going badly can be true in that same moment. So that was really helpful. Is anything particularly going to stick with you? Any questions or lines of reasoning you think this one we should revisit in future?
Oh, there's too many to mention, Ben. Too many to mention. But what particularly interests me is the way in which we use stories to justify decisions and energize staff. I love the way in which, as leaders, we can tell stories of purpose and progress. And it often means choosing the right antagonist at the right moment, doesn't it?
I think maybe it does. So that's kind of something to think about for us all. So thanks again to Martin. Thank you for Teachers Talk Radio and the sponsors for supporting the show. And we'll be back in a month's time with our next guest and a similar series of questions, and no doubt an entirely different journey that we'll walk through. So don't forget, Teachers Tap Radio. Log on, find out more about the in-person conference in Manchester in March, and I'll be back always this week, each month, 7:30 with our next show. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.